Well, thank you for joining me here today. We're going to chat with a lady from Ontario who has a really interesting background. She started off working in industry and then was almost sort of forced into advocacy and speaking up about government policy. So we're going to talk to Miss Jocelyn Bamford, who is the chair of the board for the Coalition of Concerned Manufacturers and Businesses of Canada, and she's also vice president at Automatic Coding. We're going to chat with Jocelyn about that and also about an exciting event she has coming up and some concerns about some government policies which she feels could end up costing Canadians jobs. So Jocelyn, thanks for your time today.
Hey, thanks for having me. We're happy to be able to tell our story.
Well, thanks. And you do have, I alluded to it, you've got kind of an interesting background of how you got into this world of public policy. Could you tell us a little bit more about sort of your background, the company that you work for, and then also the coalition that you've helped start up?
Yeah, so Automatic Coding started as a washing machine repair company by my father-in-law back in the 1960s, and we used to repair washing machines. And washing machines had armatures that needed to be rewound and they needed coating on them. So he traveled to Europe and brought powder coating, and we became the first powder coater in North America. We employ 92 people, both in our plant here in Scarborough, and we do have developed and patented a number of technologies for doing corrosion coating, one of which is an environmentally friendly way of stripping, blasting, and coating pipe in the field. We were working away. I started at the company after our first child. It's a family business. My husband likes to tinker around and develop patents. He came right out of high school, worked for his father because his father had some eye problems. And, we were just working away, growing our business. And the previous Ontario government was putting in a plan called Cap and Trade. And I never been involved in politics at all, except, for voting and occasionally going to events, but not very often. It was really, we had a young family. It was really none of my business, because as long as I could work at my company and grow it, previously all governments understood how important small to medium-sized business are. And in Canada, 92% of all businesses are 100 people and below. So generally, previously, most political parties understood how critical support and making sure we had a competitive environment were paramount, and everybody was aligned on that. But the previous Ontario government put in some legislation called the Green Energy Act. And that was a policy that brought in cap and trade. And when I first heard about the cap and trade, there was an industry event, and I thought, you know what, that's none of my business. I'm a small company, I'm a small emitter. That's for the big guys. That has nothing to do with me. But I went to the industry event, and I was horrified to find out that, in fact, it was my business, that the majority of small to medium-sized businesses were going to have to pay for these large credits that large corporations got. And the large corporations received money from the government. And so I was quite horrified about this. And what the consultant suggested that I do was to look at our energy outputs to decide if we could qualify for some of these credits. So the first thing I did was lay my bills out on the table, and I was quite horrified to look at my electricity bill. And what happened under the green energy policy in Ontario was that small to medium-sized business, which were classified as Class B electrical users, were taxed something called a global adjustment. And they had an unfair amount of global adjustment, and that global adjustment went to pay for all the wind and solar contracts that were given out by the previous Ontario government. And those were very lucrative contracts, 50-year contracts. The going rate for electricity at that time was about 12 cents. They got 90 cents for those per kilowatt hour for producing, and they got them for like 20, 30 years. Like they're very long-term contracts, very lucrative. And at the time, the going rate in North America for electricity was between 4 and 8 cents. And when I looked at my bill, I saw a bill that was for $30,000, and 26,000 of it was this thing called global adjustment. And I was like, there's been a terrible mistake. So I call our accounts payable people and say, there's a mistake in our hydro bill. What's this $25,000 global adjustment charge? And they didn't know because electricity was a monopoly service. So I went to Toronto Hydro and asked them, what is this for? Can you explain it to me? And I didn't get a great answer. So I did some research and I realized that small to medium-sized companies was a really easy place for people to put the bulk of this charge on because, again, most of us are under 100 people. We don't have lobbyists. We're not well organized. And so we were easy picking. So we were disproportionately funding wind and solar contracts. And as a result, we were very uncompetitive in our electricity rate. We were paying like 28 cents and above per kilowatt hour when the going rate was 4 to 6. So, and some cases 8 on a high end. And so I started to see a phenomenon happening in Ontario because of this green energy policy. And that was that companies were doing one of 4 things. They were either leaving and relocating. They were going bankrupt because they couldn't afford their energy costs and they couldn't compete with products coming in from overseas that didn't have these expensive carbon taxes or cap and trade and expensive electricity costs. They were just closing up shop. They were deciding, I'm done, I can't compete. A lot of entrepreneurs, just like you see across the board, are baby boomers that are of retirement age, so they were just shutting it down, or they were selling out. In many cases, they were selling out to large multinational corporations. So very concerned that the control over our Ontario economy was going to be taken away from small entrepreneurs, family-run businesses where they have long-term relationships with their employees, to large multinationals. So we held a meeting, and naively I thought, the government just doesn't understand. When we tell them, they'll quickly change their mind. Mm-hmm. And so we convened a meeting. We had the economic development minister from the previous Ontario government come and sit, and we had 40 businesses that went around and told their stories. They said that they were growing, but they weren't growing here. They were taking their expansions into other jurisdictions, and that electricity and unaffordable energy were one of the main drivers. And when we got to the minister, he basically said to us, you don't know how good you have it, and was giving us the talk points. And so afterwards, we decided that we needed to form our own coalition. We went to other business associations. They either told us that it was too political or they were agnostic. And so we were forced, because we weren't being represented specifically in the small to medium-sized space, to start our own association to support small business and to support our employees. And, we're being recruited all the time from US states. They have economic development people. We could move our business to the United States and save $500,000 in electricity, plus not have to pay carbon tax. They have great incentives. And quite a few of businesses that are in our coalition made that difficult decision. One made the decision because it was either move or the company was unsustainable. Now they've gone to the States, and in the first month, because of the electricity pricing, not having carbon tax and the incentives, they're profitable and they have great growth. The previous government's talk points were, if you can't afford the electricity, you don't deserve to be in business. If you can't afford the energy, you don't deserve to be in business. Well, that's not true because those companies have moved, have employed people in the United States and other locations and have given them jobs, and they are flourishing and growing. So, and imagine that we are under attack, not from foreign forces, not from our competition, but from bad policy from the previous provincial government and the current federal government. So we saw carbon tax doubling during a pandemic when we had to buy a PPE and had all these other expenses. We see the federal government trying to declare plastics as toxic, which is absurd. The plastics industry is a $36 billion with a B dollar industry in Canada, and declaring plastics toxic will not only drive jobs but investment out of Canada. So we've seen that. We've seen the attack on our resource sector, which provides high-paying, good jobs. And as a result, we've also seen the attack on the manufacturing sector, because the manufacturing sector in Ontario is very much tied to supplying parts and pieces for the resource sector. So you have to look at this and say, is there a plan to drive all manufacturing out of Canada? And if you go and just Google Canada GDP by industry segment and hit the image bar, you will see the round pie, and you will see that these terrible policies from our federal government are driving out our second and third and fourth largest GDP contributions from Canada. And that will mean less jobs for our kids and, not a positive future. And, I'm not a lobbyist. I am a hockey mom, and dragged kicking and screaming to advocacy so that we can keep our employees employed and their families prosperous. And it is very unfortunate that instead of trying to grow my business and get new customers, I have to devote so much time to fighting these bad policies so my employees can put food on the table for their families.
And thank you for sharing that. I want to come to the solutions. I want to put you on the spot and ask you, what can be done in a second, but there's more piling on that's happening right now, isn't it? With what they're calling clean fuel standards, which in plain English for the layman out there is really, it's another carbon tax that's coming, isn't it? Could you tell us a bit about that, how it's going to affect your business and some of the other businesses that are in your coalition?
Yeah, so disastrous. It's going to add additional cost to transportation and the fuels that run our operations. And it's going to impact our employees because, you're going to see at your tank of gas that maybe costs you $75 go to $150. It's going to be so damaging to again, providing unaffordable resources to operate our plants and unaffordable ways for our employees to survive, because it's going to impact home heating fuel. It's going to impact when they drive their cars. And then there's going to be the downstream effect. Everything's going to be more expensive. You think of how food gets to us. A lot of it comes from California or Mexico, and then it's transported on a truck. And that transportation cost gets passed on. So be prepared for expensive food, expensive home heating, expensive transportation to drive. And we live in a very geographic dispersed country. You need to be able to have transportation to get around, and this is going to make transportation unaffordable. It's going to make life unaffordable. And it's not, the irony is, it's not going to do anything to make the planet any more environmentally friendly. The planet will still use fossil fuels. They just won't use Canadian fossil fuels. And so they will punish Canadians' jobs and prosperity, while other countries that have less clean environmental standards and less stringent environmental standards will take the excess demand and will thrive and will will simply be putting Canadians out of work and having their lives unaffordable. And there is a great solution for this. If you truly care about a cleaner planet, then you will be for getting our clean liquefied natural gas and our clean resources to market so that countries like China and India can come off coal.
So basically get our natural gas pumped out of the ground in Alberta, BC, and other provinces, ship it over to China so that China can stop using coal-powered electricity and switch to natural gas, which reduces emissions. You touched on a point there, which just seems so nonsensical to me, and that is that manufacturing shifting from Canada to the US. So there's still going to be the emissions involved in that manufacturing. It just happens in another country. And of course, the planet doesn't recognize geographic borders. The atmosphere is fluid, air blows from one part to another. You're not stopping carbon dioxide emissions from moving around. So you're still ending up at the same carbon dioxide emissions. It just means that they're happening in another country. And all Canada's seeing from this is a loss of jobs, isn't it?
Right. And actually, I would argue that by having companies leave areas like Canada that have more environmental policy that's more stringent, you'll actually be driving the world's greenhouse gases up. So companies will relocate to other places that aren't as environmentally friendly. So instead of decreasing our footprint on our greenhouse gases, you'll actually be raising them. So not only do you drive prosperity and jobs out of Canada, you create a situation which is that exact opposite of what you want to do. And it's the same with the plastics ban. Canada is federal government is trying to declare plastics as toxic. Of course, we know plastics is not toxic. Plastics is what saved us from COVID. Plastics is what we wrap our food in. If plastics was toxic, we wouldn't be using it to wrap our food, to provide COVID injections, to protect us when we're in the grocery store. Plastics has been the champion and the savior of people's health in COVID. And the fact that the government now wants to declare it plastics is absolutely ludicrous. And the other thing is, Canada is a leader in the recycling of plastics. In fact, in Ontario, one of the Plastics Association, along with one of the hospitals, has launched the first recyclable plastic medical waste projects. And it's world class. So we can take some of our circular economy best practices that we've developed here, and we can take them throughout the world. But instead, by declaring plastics as toxic, companies that were going to invest here won't. We have one member that was going to bring one of their plants back from China to Canada. And now with the plastics as toxic designation looming, they're not going to do that. So again, costing jobs, driving companies out of Canada, and the result is a dirtier planet. So it's all for naught.
And so Jocelyn, you have an interesting event coming up later this month where you're going to have some pretty smart people talking about these issues and more. Could you tell us a little bit about the event, who's speaking, what it's all about, and how people can register and learn more?
Yeah, so one of the things that the Coalition's doing in association with some other great organizations that care about Canadian prosperity and opportunity for our kids and jobs and the economy and a bright future came together in November, and we had an event. It attracted 1,200 Canadians to listen to us talk about how we can recover with our resource sector and our manufacturing sector. And it was a great success. I think many Canadians really resonate with the fact that by having unaffordable energy and driving companies offshore, that we were in such a vulnerable position with the pandemic without having PPE and medicines and ventilators. And so we argue that if we had affordable energy, we can bring manufacturing back. And we can have prosperity in Canada. Can you imagine if we just got some projects approved where we could get our clean liquefied natural gas offshore? How many Canadians we could employ? How many high-paying jobs? How much does that would go for things like healthcare and schools? And because the federal government's so ideologically driven, they refuse to do that. And in the next crisis, not only could we find ourselves without PPE, without gloves, without gowns, without masks, without ventilators, we could also find ourselves in a situation where we don't have energy to run our hospitals, where we don't have energy to run our plants and can participate in a critical supply chain. So there is much concern about that amongst ordinary Canadians. So we are providing a venue for ordinary Canadians to hear people talk about that. So the topic is the Great Reset and why this is bad for Canada and what a better solution is. And it's going to be on the 28th at 2 o'clock. We're going to have Rex Murphy. We're going to have Christine Van Gyn. We're going to have Anthony Fury. And we're going to have Peter Watson, all talking about our vision for Canada and why we believe the current federal government's on the wrong track and how we can right this ship. And we'll right it for our employees and their families and our kids so they can have a brighter future. So we hope that you'll tune in. It's a free event. We'll be advertising it on our coalition website as well as very many associations that have come together in support of this because we are so passionate about preserving prosperity in Canada.
That's great. That's January 28th at 2 p.m. Eastern, correct?
Eastern Standard Time, yes. And you can go on our website, ccmbc.ca, and look for registration. Again, it's a free event, and we are encouraging Canadians to sign up and listen in and really do something to help us preserve our prosperous way of life in Canada.
Well, that's great. And kudos to you and others for taking the initiative to put this on. I think it's great when we get more people talking about public policy in this country and what can and can't be done. We don't all have to agree on everything, but it's good, I think, when we have more people paying attention, we end up with more good ideas. And hopefully, as a result, better public policy that helps Canadians.
Right. And we just want to get back to doing what we do best, which is growing our companies and providing jobs for Canadians. We don't want to continuously be involved in bad public policy that's really driving jobs and prosperity out of Canada. And that's such a simple thing to do. And we've got such a great opportunity now to seize this moment and really bring jobs back to Canada and bring prosperity back to Canada. And why wouldn't we want to seize that moment?
I totally agree. And I think jobs are going to be more and more of a concern as the months ahead unfold and more Canadians are sadly looking for work because so many businesses have shut down because of COVID. So again, kudos to you for doing that. Thanks for telling us, take a few minutes to tell us about your story and talk to us about some ideas that could help with addressing environmental concerns and also about your event that's coming up. So thanks again.
Well, happy to do it and great to spend some time with you and your viewers.
Perfect.